Oh yeah! We are doing Mortal Kombat 9. Thank you guys so much for voting for this week's episode. I'm super excited about this. So let's get started. So with a couple of exceptions, the focus of this episode is going to be on the stages, because there are a ton of stages for Mortal Kombat 9, and I didn't want to leave any out. So the first one that we're going to look at is the default level for the training mode. Now, just like its intention in the game itself, this is more of a warm-up to what we're about to see, because there's not a whole lot to look at here. But we do finally get a chance to see the actual depth, and we finally get to see how much of the stage is modeled outside of the camera's view. This is one of the reasons why I love Mortal Kombat 9 so much. It essentially takes you through the story of Mortal Kombat 1, 2, and 3, and to pull that off, they reimagined some of the most iconic stages from the series. And here we're looking at one of the most identifiable stages from Mortal Kombat 1. And the first thing that I wanted to point out is these weird looking guards with spears, because when you finally get to see their entire bodies in the trench, it looks like they have no feet. And my initial reaction was, yeah, that makes sense. They don't need to model feet if no one's going to see them. But I had to make sure, so I took the camera to the bottom of these pant legs, and believe it or not, they actually are wearing shoes. It may be a little hard for you intrepid viewers to see, since it's black shoes inside of a dark inner pant leg, but much to my surprise, it's there. And what's also interesting is that not every stage has an environment behind the camera. But in this stage, likely for in-game cutscenes, there is a wall that wraps all the way around this arena. And way off in the distance of the stage, we can finally get a better look at some of these backdrops. Like, for example, this boat back here, which I believe is a very affectionate nod to the Mortal Kombat film, which brought our Earthrealm heroes to the tournament. And some of the more perceptive viewers right now are probably at their keyboards ready to say, but she says there's no dragon on the mast. That was in the film. And I would say to you, good eye. But one thing you may not have caught from way off in the distance is that the front of the mast in this game is broken, it's damaged. Yeah, consider that. And one more thing I want to talk about before we move on to the next stage is birds. Oh, I love birds. And what's really funny is that this is a boundary break first, where the birds that we look at on this show are not 3D modeled. And what's incredibly ironic about that is that we're looking at a last generation game, not Nintendo 64, not PlayStation 2. This is Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. So in a series first, one of the newest games that I've ever covered has put the least amount of detail into their birds. Yeah, another classic stage that was debuted on Mortal Kombat 2 was best well known for its acid stage fatality. But before we delve deeper into that, I thought we'd take a look at some of the backdrop characters. Like, for example, this beefy looking dude that operates the sadistic torture crank, who you're going to find out later in this episode was reused in later stages to save on development resources, much like our bald blind friend here, who has a gross open chest cavity that glows. Alright. Anyways, the highlight of this stage is when we dive magic camera into the acid, we can actually see a T-pose of the models used for when you knock a character into the acid pit and they die of a fatality, and what rises out is this melted corpse. And there's actually two in the stage depending on where you knock them in. It's really cool. Next stage is the desert, and there's not really a whole lot to talk about with the desert, but it's just one of those stages that looks like there's a lot of vastness to it, and that maybe there could be something in the background. But when you zoom out the camera, you can see the actual scope of the stage, and get great insight into the visual trickery that some developers do to get more bang out of their buck. Now we're inside Goro's lair, my favorite Mortal Kombat character, featuring Goro, of course. Anyways, when we take the camera above Goro's throne, we can see that the surface is actually the courtyard, which was the second stage that we looked at in this episode. And I will make the bold claim that this is essentially an unused texture because, well, light bleeds into the stage, but you never really get to see anything past the grating from normal camera means. But one of my favorite things about Goro's lair is the detail in the background itself. Some of these enemies that just don't look that great in 720p on an Xbox 360, like this little hunchback guy over here, have a lot of detail to them. It's really surprising. If you come back here, you can actually see that, well, look at that. It's one of the two characters that we looked at earlier. He's chasing one of the hunchback guys. So that's two reused assets that they managed to hide way in the back. The only thing you were really able to see is that there was two characters in the middle of a chase. So right now we're looking at the graveyard, and right off the bat, the most insane thing about this area is the soul a tornado, I don't know what it really is, but what I do know is that it's way more massive than I ever gave it credit for when I was actually playing the game. What's one really funny thing about this is that this is also a reused asset. And in the back there's a dragon hugging a 2D texture, and that dragon is also a reused asset. That's going to be a trending theme in this episode, I think, but they do it so well. It's really impressive. Alright, so now we're at Kahn's Coliseum, and the first thing we obviously have to look at is the audience, which turns out in Outworld there's just a bunch of human characters with multicolored geese. I wasn't expecting that. But the individual animation on these guys is actually a lot more elaborate than I thought it would be. And I wanted to take a look at the monster that these two guys with spears are fighting. But more specifically, I wanted to take a look at these two men because you don't really get to see them. So surprisingly, there's a good amount of detail to them. You can see some scars on their face, and their eyes actually track the movements of the monster, which is really impressive and very unnecessary. And they're both bald. I'm just noticing now that all the background characters are bald. Is there a reason for that? When in doubt, bald them out? You know what? It's probably a lot easier than modeling hair. So before we get started on this classic Mortal Kombat 2 stage, I wanted to take a look at Shao Kahn. Could not leave this out. This was absolutely amazing to me. If we take the camera through his mask, you can actually see that there's a texture underneath. He has a face underneath his mask. Now, unfortunately, I can't remove the mask myself, and the character moves around quite a bit, so even if I use the camera, it's really hard to get a good track on his face to get a good look at it. So I googled it. I googled Mortal Kombat 9, Shao Kahn, no mask. And there was one person on the internet, this isn't even properly documented, it just happened to be on a forum, and the guy found it and he just shared it with his forum buddies. But this is what Shao Kahn looks like without his mask. Now, I'm not entirely convinced that his face is supposed to be dark like this. I think that was just the artist's decision to do that so that it would look like it's shadowed by the mask. But yeah, if you ever wanted to know what Shao Kahn looked like without his mask in Mortal Kombat 9, there you go. Okay, let's get back to the stage. So one of the first things I noticed is that the bald spearman from the last stage is once again reused. Only this time, he is insect food, I guess, or arachnid food. I think it's a mixture of both. But what's really, it's kind of disturbing. But from a technical aspect, it's kind of interesting because you can see the program path that these insects walk in. And trust me, die-hard Mortal Kombat fans, I tried to find smoke. Yeah, I was disappointed too. But since there's no smoke there, I figured we could do a zoom out and move on. Alright, now we're finally covering the bridge, my favorite Mortal Kombat stage out of any Mortal Kombat game. First thing we gotta check is there anything past those gates? Nah, unfortunately not. And then the other thing, of course we have to immediately check, is the characters fighting in the background. And this time around it is Dagon and Serena. Now I have to admit, I don't really know most of the characters that actually show up in the background. This game is clearly pandering to my generation of Mortal Kombat fandom, which is just the first 3 games. But to those of you who are fans of the later games, here's your close-up look. And then I took the camera as far back as we can, and we can see that the volcano is not fully modeled, but that makes perfect sense. You'd never be able to get that far. But by far the best thing about this stage is that the drop to the bottom of the bridge is always there. What a treat for someone like me to be able to zoom out the camera all the way and see both the top and the bottom of the bridge in one shot. And now we're at the stage that's meant to be the bottom of the pit, as you can clearly see when you move the camera up. In fact, we got ourselves, again, a lot of reused assets, like our little hunchback guy eating some flesh. And if we take the camera to see what's just around the riverbend, we'll find that there's really not a whole lot to it. But I guess what's a little interesting is that the top of the bridge is only a 2D texture once you get to the top. Why they even bothered to make a top of the bridge in the first place, I'll never know. Now this stage is awesome. Not because I found anything particularly new, but if you know this stage, you obviously want a better look of the battle between the dragon and the helicopter. And before we moved on to the next stage, I want to see some stuff blow up. Hey, by the way, if you look in the back, there's that soul tornado. But anyways, here's another character with a hidden face. Rain. Rain's my jam because he sports the purple like she says does. So I figured I'd pay some respects by showing you, the viewer, what his face looks like as well. Now again, this is just by doing a Google search. I would have credited the person who made this if I could have found them. But I'm starting to see why Rain hides himself behind a mask. Dude's got a silly nose. But again, this is just one of those stages where there's not a whole lot to it outside of the soul tornado and those floating ghoul guys, which again is a reused asset. You'll find out in 1 second. There's that ghoul that I mentioned just a moment ago, and now we are in a stage where day and night just happens within seconds. It's very cool, albeit a little bit trippy. Anyways, when you take the camera outside of the building, you can see that there is large buildings that go way below the player's perspective. And when you decide to look that low, you can see where the moon starts and the sun ends. It's actually amazing how much is going on outside here, despite the fact that you only get a small window into the view. So this portion was a viewer request. Oh, sweet baby Jesus! Oh, great. So the viewers wanted to know whether or not moving the camera out of place will change the position of whatever the hell that thing was. And I'm gonna have to subject myself to that one more time just to find out. Okay, I've readjusted the camera. Is it coming? Do I need to reload the crypt or something? Ah! No! No, it doesn't change anything. He still does it. No more viewer requests. Okay, we need to end this episode on a high note. And I couldn't think of a better stage than the city. And what's funny is that while I was looking at the characters, I inadvertently just kind of went all cinematic while chasing that car. I saw the car and I started chasing it. And you know what? It looked pretty good. And the end of this little guy's journey was actually kind of a funny one. He hangs out in the void for a little while before disappearing. And then I took a look at the army trying to take down that reused asset, aka the monster from Khan's Coliseum, and the soldiers look really funny. For example, this guy over here looks like he's playing pretend. Pew, 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 pew. Actually, you know what? These guys kind of look like the Incredible Crash dummies. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Am I starting to show my age? And here's one last beautiful zoom out of the city. Alright, should I start apologizing now for the jump scare? I hope you know it's all in good fun. Anyways, this episode was going on way longer than I thought it was, so I actually cut out a couple stages, and there was a handful of things I could boundary break that are not stage related. So, I'm going to be putting a Mortal Kombat 9 Part 2 in the poll this week, along with the choice of Link's crossbow training, Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles, or a top 10 list of games I wish I could boundary break, but I can't. And as far as the shirts go, it's gonna happen, fellas, and a couple of you ladies. No need to email me about a free shirt at this point. I already have over 300 requests for a t-shirt, so I'm definitely in no short supply of recipients. And if you get a shirt, I'd really love it if you sent me a picture of you wearing it so that I could feature you in an episode. But alright guys, thanks a ton for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was worth the wait. And thanks so much for letting me do this episode. I had a blast. Later.